Okay, now let's talk about debt and deficit. I mean, John, governments often are in a situation where they are spending more money than they are raising in tax revenue. Ergo, a deficit. Over time, this can accumulate and the government gets a debt. Why should anyone be concerned about debts and deficits in government?
For the same reason that they should be concerned about their own debts and deficits. Debt is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's what you do with it that counts. In your own family, your parents might have taken out a mortgage to buy the house. That's a huge debt, but they get a house out of it, and they pay that debt over time, and then in the end, the house is worth more than what they paid for it, so it's a good thing. Your credit card, on the other hand, you rack that up. The debt, the interest rate's 20%. You don't get it paid off. Before long, you're paying the interest rate every month rather than what you actually purchased. Governments do that. Canada in the early 1990s was so deeply in debt that it was in danger of having to go to outside agencies to come and help pay its debt. So the government decided that it had to tear up the credit cards. And it hurt. Taxes went up, spending was cut, people really suffered. But they got the government out of debt. And then for about a decade, both liberal and conservative governments were able to pay down debt, lower taxes, spend money. It was good. But then the Great Recession hit in 2009. And all around the world, every country went into an economic crisis. And it looked as though we could go into a Great Depression, which would be 25% unemployment, horrible, horrible stress. So every government around the world spent huge amounts of money to goose the economy, to get it going again. And that meant they had to go back into deficits.
I'm going to stop you right there because I want to bring the other panelists in. I mean, that, as John was saying, that we went for a long time. You worked for Finance Minister Paul Martin, who helped eradicate the deficit, where governments were in surplus. We're now in deficit as a consequence of the recession of 2008, 2009. Was that a mistake in your view?
It wasn't a mistake to do the stimulus package, but I think that we're being too simplistic. If you take a look at some of the other policy changes that were implemented before the recession hit, we were already on path to eliminating our surplus. I mean, this is an area where political parties really do differ. Conservatives believe that if you run a surplus as a government, if you take in $10 billion more dollars in a year than you spend, then you're overtaxing people, and that's a terrible thing. When I worked for Paul Martin, his view was we've got a huge debt. I'm happy to take in an extra $10 billion. I'll lower our debt. That means it's easier for us to pay our credit card bill each month. And then I've got flexibility. That was Ms. Martin always used to say. You always emphasize, I want flexibility, because you know what? The cycle changes. Problem times are going to come, and I want to be running surplus. I want to be in a balanced budget position so that if I have to spend more and go into a deficit, then it will only be for a couple of years, and I can pull myself out. The big question and concern right now is that the kids that are watching might find that we're still in deficit by the time they're our age and sitting in chairs like this. And that's the real concern, what they call a structural deficit, and that's what we must avoid. Not short-term deficits to deal with changes in the economy, but a long-term structural deficit that adds and adds and adds to debt. The next thing you know, you're Europe and you're cracking like a bad vase.
Kathleen?
There's a couple problems here. Previous governments and the current government have reduced the fiscal capacity of the federal government to actually take action.
What does that mean?
It means that they have reduced certain or removed certain taxes and also lowered certain corporate taxes to such a level that the federal government is not actually bringing in the same kind of revenue that they previously were able to. In fact, in future years and certainly future elections, I think parties will be faced with a serious crisis when it comes to the fiscal capacity of a government to actually implement public policy programs. But I don't want to say that debt is the boogeyman. You know what the debt boogeyman really is? Is consumer debt right now. Right now we have the highest levels of consumer debts. Families are being crushed under the consumer debt, and we don't have the growth that we've depended on in past generations, whether it was the economic prosperity or the housing market or other things, to actually fuel that growth. And the government has relied on families spending money and the government not spending money. And it would be my belief, and I believe my party's belief, that actually at this time, when we've got such low interest rates, that the government should actually be spending more because it's affordable, we can afford to do it, and have that long-term vision that I was talking about previously, have the long-term vision to actually invest in our infrastructure, invest in our schools and training and education so that we're ready for the new economy.